Dusty Gulch and the Traveling Wonders. The Discord announced the arrival before the sight of it all. A wheezy steam organ coughed up a mangled waltz, battling for dominance against the desperate hee-haws of a donkey burdened by a flatbed draped in threadbare velvet. Then, into Dusty Gulch they lurched, the Traveling Wonders Circus. Delighted shrieks erupted from children, dogs joined in a barking frenzy, and the townsfolk, aching for diversion, thronged the sun-baked main street. Leading the ramshackle procession was Silas Blackwood, teetering atop a precarious tower of crates plastered with gaudy depictions of mythical creatures. His top hat was comically oversized, his smile a mere facade. He flung cheap baubles into the throng, each gesture practiced, each grin a hollow performance. Behind him trailed a motley crew, a juggler sporting painted teardrops, a strong man whose bulging biceps hinted at artifice, and a fortune-teller, her shoulder host to a parrot squawking cryptic pronouncements. Bringing up the rear, a rusted iron cage groaned under its own weight. Cowering within was Amelia, labeled the Wild Child. From the saloon's shadowed porch, Boone observed, his gaze unwavering. He hadn't ridden into Dusty Gulch seeking a circus. Supplies and rest for Jericho, his horse, were his objectives. But the chaotic parade had ensnared his attention, holding it fast. He saw beyond the dirt smudged across Amelia's face, past the ragged scraps of clothing clinging to her slender form, ignoring the heavy chain that tethered her wrist. A spark of defiance flickered in her dark eyes, a hint of untamed spirit beneath the evident exhaustion. On the town's outskirts, a circus tent, a hodgepodge of faded canvas and mismatched poles, arose. That evening, anticipation crackled in the air like static. Boone lingered at the periphery, a silent presence. A dime secured his entry, the mingled sense of sawdust and stale popcorn assaulting his senses. The acts proved predictably disappointing. The juggler's cascade of pins, the strongman's failed Herculean attempt, the fortune-teller's parrot nipping child. Then Silas Blackwood strode into the ring, his voice amplified by the big top, booming. And now, esteemed patrons, the moment you've anticipated. I present, plucked from the deepest, darkest jungles, the untamed, the ferocious. The Wild Child. A spotlight blazed to life, trapping the cage in its harsh glare. Amelia recoiled, drawing inward. With a cruel grin, Silas rattled the bars. "Show them your stuff, Sparrow." Amelia, or Sparrow, as Silas tauntingly called her, remained statue still. A restless murmur rippled through the crowd, impatient for the spectacle. Silas's smile tightened. He cracked a whip, the sharp report cleaving the air. Sparrow flinched, unmoving. Again, the whip cracked, closer this time, its tip leaving a burning trail on her arm. Boone's fist clenched. Finally, with a strangled cry, Sparrow surged against the bars, shaking them with unexpected force. She snarled, teeth bared, eyes ablaze with mingled fear and rage. The crowd roared its approval. Silas chuckled, the whip a conductor's baton, controlling her every move. She paced her prison, a creature robbed of its nature, forced to perform. Boone watched, jaw set. He noted the flicker in Silas' eyes, possessive and cold. He discerned the almost invisible tremor in Amelia's hands. This wasn't a wild child, but a shattered girl forced to play a role. The performance continued, a degrading charade of simulated savagery. Silas reveled in the crowd's response, luxuriating in their dread and delight. But Boone perceived only the agony in Amelia's gaze, an anguish echoing the emptiness within himself. As the lights faded and the audience started to drift away, Boone remained rooted to the spot. He stood in the shadows, watching Silas secure the cage, a smug expression plastered on his face. He watched as two hulking figures hauled the cage toward a smaller, more decrepit tent on the circus's outer edge. He watched until the last lantern flickered and died, leaving only the chorus of crickets and the distant cry of a coyote. Then, Boone turned and vanished into the night. He knew what he must do. Chains and a cowboy's resolve. The painted smile Amelia wore was a flimsy mask, failing to conceal the exhaustion etched around her eyes. Boone watched her bow, the metallic rasp of her chains a cynical counterpoint to the audience's roaring applause. They saw entertainment. He recognized enslavement, a sight he'd witnessed too often. Long after the final act, he lingered near the ticket stand, the air thick with sawdust and the cloying sweetness of day-old popcorn. The circus's harsh illumination cast a jaundiced glow on the dust devils swirling around his worn boots. He imagined the glare, the cheers, the constraints, steadily diminishing Amelia's existence to the confines of that very ring. Back at his Spartan campsite, the fire snapped, sending glowing cinders spiraling into the dark expanse above. He gazed into the flickering heart of the flames, their meager glow a poor substitute for the warmth he'd long since lost. From his saddlebag, he withdrew a faded photograph. A younger Boone, radiating joy, stood alongside a woman whose eyes held the brilliance of summer sky, and a little girl sporting pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. Sarah and Lily vanished, devoured by a runaway stagecoach, a catastrophic will break, and his own inability to prevent it. Guilt, his constant shadow, clawed at him. He had failed them. He hadn't been quick enough, strong enough, worthy enough. Now, in Amelia, he sensed a chance, however improbable, at redemption. He recognized a shard of the same shattered spirit residing within her, along with a fierce resolve struggling against the weight of her suffering. He squeezed his eyes shut as the fire gave a loud crack, the sound mimicking the sharp report of the whip during Amelia's performance. He flinched. That cycle would end, if he had any say in the matter. Hours before dawn, Boone stirred. A quiet determination informed his movements, the whisper of the desert wind his only confidant. He gathered provisions, stout rope, a keen-edged knife, a full canteen, and strips of cured meat. From beneath his saddle blanket, he unearthed a pair of bolt cutters, their powerful jaws gleaming faintly in the gloom. He'd once used them to liberate a stray calf tangled in barbed wire. This felt different, charged with a deeper significance. He pictured Amelia's face, the deep lines bracketing her lips, the haunted depths of her stare. Her story remained unknown, but he understood enough. He knew the taste of captivity, the sting of helplessness, the violation of one's very being. He checked his revolver, ensuring it was loaded and secure. He sought no confrontation, but he wouldn't shy from one. He was a man of peace, yet equally a man of his word, even if that word was a silent vow to himself. He saddled his horse, the leather protesting with soft creaks in the stillness. As he swung into the saddle, he glanced back at the fading embers, a representation of the life he was leaving behind, a life defined by solitude, regret, and quiet despair. He urged his horse forward, toward the circus, toward Amelia, toward an uncertain future. The vast, unforgiving desert lay before him. Yet tonight, Boone Callahan felt a fragile hope blossom within his chest. It was a delicate flame, easily snuffed out, but it was enough to guide him through the darkness. Enough to keep him riding. Escape under the moon. The moon, a silver coin in the inky sky, cast long shadows across Amelia's wagon. Boone knelt, his weathered face etched with concentration as he worked the lock on her chains. The metallic clicks echoed in the stillness, each one a hammer blow against the silence. Amelia watched him, her breath held tight in her chest. Distrust, a constant companion, warred with a fragile hope. She hadn't spoken a word to him since he'd appeared at her wagon. Finally, the last lock sprung open. Boone looked up, his eyes, the color of storm clouds, meeting hers. He didn't smile, didn't offer any empty reassurances, just a silent, steady gaze that somehow calmed the frantic flutter in her heart. He reached out, his calloused hand gently encircling her wrist, and helped her to her feet. Her legs, unused to bearing her weight after so long in chains, wobbled. Steady, he murmured, his voice a low rumble. The air in the wagon was thick with the scent of sawdust and despair. Outside, the circus grounds were quiet, save for the distant snores of roustabouts and the occasional whinny of a horse. Boone extinguished the lantern, plunging them into darkness. The only light came from the sliver of moon that filtered through the gaps in the wagon's planks. He led her out, his hand never leaving her wrist. The cool night air kissed her skin, a stark contrast to the stifling heat of the wagon. The earth felt unfamiliar beneath her bare feet. They moved like shadows, sticking to the edges of the tents, avoiding the pools of light cast by the few remaining lanterns. Once a dog barked, a sharp, insistent sound that sent a jolt of fear through Amelia. Boone froze, pulling her behind a stack of wooden crates. The barking grew closer, then faded as the dog lost interest. They waited, hearts pounding, until the silence returned. The smells of the circus assaulted Amelia's senses: popcorn, animal musk, stale beer, each one a reminder of her captivity. Boone navigated the maze of tents and wagons with a quiet confidence, his senses alert. He seemed to know exactly where he was going, as if he'd memorized every inch of the grounds. They reached the edge of the circus, where the trees began, a dark, impenetrable wall. A single guard stood watch by the main gate, his back to them, smoking a cigarette. The red glow of the ember punctuated the darkness. Boone tugged Amelia back into the shadows. He pointed to a section of the fence, where the wood was old and rotten. He produced a small knife from his belt and began to work on the weakened planks. Splintered wood groaned as he pried them apart, creating a hole just big enough to slip through. He went first, then turned back to help Amelia. She hesitated, her gaze drawn back to the garish lights of the circus. A life of misery, yes, but a life she knew. This escape was a leap into the unknown, a world she hadn't dared to dream of. Boone's hand tightened on hers. "Come on, Sparrow," he whispered, using the name he'd heard the ringmaster use. Almost there. The sound of her name, spoken with such unexpected gentleness, broke through her fear. She ducked through the hole, following Boone into the darkness of the woods. The trees closed around them, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers. The sounds of the circus faded behind them, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the chirping of crickets. They ran, stumbling over roots and rocks, until they reached a small stream. Boone stopped, catching his breath. He looked at Amelia, his face unreadable in the moonlight. "We keep moving," he said, "till the sun comes up." Blackwood's fury. The stench hit Silas before the sight. A metallic tang, thick and cloying, mingled with the usual sawdust and animal musk. He'd known something was off the moment he'd seen Boris, the baboon, agitated, rattling his cage and throwing feces. Now, the truth was laid bare. Amelia's cage was empty. The lock lay on the ground, neatly severed, the metal glinting dully in the lamplight. A dark stain bloomed on the straw-covered floor, soaking into the fibers. Silas knelt, touching the viscous liquid with a trembling finger. Blood. Her blood. Not much, but enough. A guttural roar ripped from his throat, echoing through the deserted tent. He kicked the cage door with a force that rattled the entire structure. "Damn that little bitch." He rose, fists clenched, his face a mask of crimson rage. Amelia wasn't just a sideshow act. She was an investment, a draw, a guarantee. And more than that, she was his. The thought of her, running free, belonging to no one, was a brand on his soul. "Jed," he bellowed, his voice cracking. "Get your ass in here now." The flap of the tent was thrown back, and Jed slouched in, his scarred face impassive. A thin cheroot dangled from his lips, the smoke curling around his closed-set eyes. "What's all the ruckus, Silas? Some of us are trying to sleep." "Sleep?" Silas spat, striding towards him. "Amelia's gone. Escaped. And someone helped her." He gripped Jed's shirt, his knuckles white. "I want them found. I want them brought back. Dead or alive, I don't care which." Jed's eyes narrowed. "The Sparrow flew the coop, huh? And you think someone helped her?" He considered this, then a slow grin spread across his face, revealing yellowed teeth. "All right, Silas. You know I enjoy a good hunt." Silas released him, pacing back and forth like a caged tiger. "Take whoever you need. Horses, rifles, everything. I want this done quickly." The longer they're out there, the harder it'll be. He stopped abruptly, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous light. And Jed, make an example. Let everyone know what happens when they cross Silas Blackwood. Jed nodded, crushing the cheroot under his heel. Consider it done. He turned and lumbered out of the tent, his boots crunching on the gravel. Inside the main tent, Jed surveyed the sleeping forms scattered around the edges. He kicked at a few, rousing them from their slumber. All right, you lazy bastards, rise and shine. We got a job to do. A few groans and curses echoed in the dim light. Jed ignored them. Silas wants the sparrow back, and whoever helped her. So saddle up, grab your rifles, and let's go hunting. He singled out 3 men, a hulking brute named Gus, a weasel-faced tracker called Finn, and a young, eager kid named Billy. You 3 with me. The rest of you, stay here and keep things running. Gus grunted in acknowledgement, already reaching for his gun belt. Finn, ever the pragmatist, was checking the contents of his satchel. Billy, his face flushed with excitement, grabbed his rifle and hurried to the stables. Jed watched them, a predatory glint in his eyes. He could almost taste the fear, the desperation, the thrill of the chase. Blackwood's fury was a powerful weapon, and Jed was more than happy to wield it. This wasn't just about bringing back a runaway. It was about reminding everyone who was in control. And Jed, more than anyone, understood the value of control. He adjusted the rifle slung across his back, a cruel smile playing on his lips. Let's ride. Canyons of distrust. Dust billowed behind them, a pale cloud chasing their frantic retreat into the maw of the canyons. The sun beat down, baking the already parched earth, and the air shimmered with a heat that made Sparrow's head swim. She clung to the back of Boone's horse, the rough fabric of his shirt digging into her cheek, the animal's powerful muscles bunching and flexing beneath her. Fear, raw and sharp, clawed at her throat. One moment she was in chains, the next she was hurtling through the wilderness with a man she barely knew. Was this freedom, or just a different kind of cage? They rode for what felt like hours, the canyon walls rising around them, their striated surfaces painted in shades of red, ochre, and rust. The silence was broken only by the rhythmic thud of hooves and the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. Sparrow risked a glance back. No sign of pursuit, but she knew it wouldn't be long. Boone finally reined the horse to a halt in a narrow alcove shaded by a scraggly juniper tree. He dismounted, his movements economical and precise. He offered her a hand down, but she ignored it, sliding to the ground on her own. The impact jarred her bones, a reminder of her own weakness. We need to rest the horse, he said, his voice low and gravelly, like stones grinding together. Sparrow crossed her arms, her gaze fixed on him. Why did you do it? He frowned, his eyes, the color of desert twilight, meeting hers. Do what? Free me. Why risk your life for someone you don't even know? He turned away, busying himself with unsaddling the horse. Didn't seem right, is all. Didn't seem right, she echoed, her voice laced with incredulity. You broke the law, you put yourself in danger, all because it didn't seem right? He tightened the cinch, avoiding her gaze. There are some things a man just has to do. And what about after? She pressed, her voice rising. What happens after we get away? Where are we going? Do you even have a plan? He sighed, a sound like wind whistling through a crack in the rocks. I have a place. A cabin up in the mountains. It's safe. Safe for who? She challenged. For you? Or for me? He finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. Both of us. I don't believe you, she whispered, the words like a venomous hiss. I don't know you. I don't know what you want from me. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over her. I don't want anything from you, Sparrow, except maybe your trust. Trust. She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. Trust is a luxury I can't afford. He flinched, as if struck. He opened his mouth to speak, then seemed to think better of it. He turned away again, his shoulders slumped. Who are you, Boone? She asked, the question hanging in the still air. What are you running from? He was silent for a long moment. Then, without turning around, he said, That's a story for another time. The sun continued its relentless descent, painting the canyon walls in fiery hues. The air grew cooler, but the tension between them remained, thick and suffocating, a canyon of distrust that seemed impossible to bridge. Sparrow watched him, her heart aching with a longing she couldn't name. She wanted to believe him, to trust him, but years of betrayal had built walls around her heart, walls that were proving impossible to tear down. And something told her, deep down, that Boone was hiding something that could shatter the fragile hope that had begun to bloom within her. A spring of hope. The heat shimmered, a deceptive mirage across the rocky terrain. Sparrow's throat felt like sandpaper, each breath a painful reminder of their dwindling water supply. Boone, ever vigilant, scanned the horizon, his eyes narrowed against the glare. He hadn't spoken much since they'd lost the pursuing riders, but his silence felt less oppressive, more considerate. Then he stopped, his hand raised. "Wait." Sparrow squinted, seeing nothing but rock and scrub. Boone dismounted, tethering his horse to a stunted juniper. He moved with a purpose she hadn't witnessed before, heading toward a cluster of boulders draped with thorny vines. He disappeared behind them. A moment later, she heard a sound, faint but unmistakable, the trickle of water. Hope, a fragile thing she rarely allowed herself, fluttered her chest. She stumbled after him, pushing aside the prickly vines. There it was, a small spring, nestled in the shade, water bubbling up from the earth into a clear pool. It wasn't much, but it was life. Boone was already cupping water in his hands, drinking deeply. He gestured for her to do the same. She hesitated, then knelt, bringing her hands to the cool water. It was the sweetest thing she had ever tasted. They drank their fill, then watered the horses. The relief was profound, a weight lifted from their shoulders. Boone refilled their canteens, his movements economical and efficient. "We'll stay here tonight," he said, his voice rough. "Give the horses and ourselves a rest." Sparrow nodded, too grateful to argue. She found a relatively flat patch of ground near the spring and sank down, exhaustion pulling at her. As dusk settled, Boone built a small fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on the surrounding rocks. He offered her a piece of dried meat, which she accepted, gnawing on it slowly. The silence stretched between them, less strained than before. After a while, Boone spoke, his voice low, almost hesitant. "My pa, he used to say, every fire tells a story. You just gotta listen close enough." Sparrow looked at him, surprised. He was looking into the flames, his expression unreadable. She decided to listen to her own fire story and shared about the monkeys that once escaped the circus menagerie, wreaking havoc in a small town. She chuckled softly at the memory. Boone didn't laugh, but a faint smile touched his lips. "I once tracked a mountain lion for 3 days. Turned out it was just a mangy dog with a bad attitude." The stories continued, small offerings of themselves shared in the flickering light. Sparrow learned that Boone had been a ranch hand since he was a boy, that he loved horses more than people, and that he carried a burden of guilt for something he wouldn't name. She, in turn, spoke of the ringmaster's cruel punishments, the loneliness of being an outsider, and the dream she had of a life beyond the circus tent. As she spoke, she noticed Boone's unwavering gaze, a quiet empathy in his eyes. Later, as the fire died down, a small rabbit, caught in the snare Boone had set earlier, cried out in distress. Sparrow flinched, the sound too familiar, too close to the sounds of the circus animals. Boone was instantly alert. He approached the snare, his movements gentle and deliberate. Sparrow watched as he carefully freed the rabbit, examining its leg for injuries. He spoke to it in a low, soothing voice before releasing it back into the darkness. Sparrow stared at him, a strange warmth spreading through her. It was a small act, but it spoke volumes. She saw a gentleness in him that she hadn't noticed before, a compassion that ran deep. Maybe, just maybe, this man wasn't as closed off as he seemed. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she felt. The spring had provided more than water. It had watered something else, too, a seed of hope, fragile but alive, in the barren landscape of her heart. Canyon ambush. canyon walls pressed close, the track a mere sliver of passage. Amelia stared ahead, the heavy silence amplifying the frantic drumming in her chest. Boone, a silent guardian, sat astride his horse, rifle across the saddle. The air, thick with the aroma of dust and baked earth, felt suffocating. Then pandemonium erupted. Gunfire tore through the stillness, echoing off the rock faces like a furious storm. Bullets snapped past Amelia's ear, scattering dust motes. Silas's thugs. They were cornered. Boone reacted instinctively. He hauled Amelia's mount to a screeching halt, hustling her behind a massive outcropping. "Stay down," he commanded, the gruffness in his tone a sharp departure from his usual reserve. He dismounted in one swift motion, rifle already in hand. Amelia watched, breath caught, as his keen gaze swept the heights, searching. The relentless spang of bullets against stone filled the air. Fear threatened to immobilize her, but she fought it down, forcing herself to observe. She had to be ready to act. Boone moved with a speed and purpose she hadn't suspected. Dropping to a knee, he used the boulder as a shield and unleashed a shot. Clean, precise. A shriek echoed from above. He fired again. Another cry of pain. He wasn't just shooting to wound. He was eliminating threats. Amelia risked a peek. A body tumbled from the ridge, vanishing into the dense undergrowth. Silas's men held the high ground, a tactical advantage that should have spelled disaster. Yet Boone, with his uncanny marksmanship, was shifting the balance. "Can you handle a weapon?" he bellowed, eyes still fixed on the ridge. Amelia hesitated. The circus had taught her many skills, but firearms were not among them. "No," she confessed, shame stinging her. She was utterly helpless. Boone didn't reprimand her. He simply grunted, his jaw tight. "Then keep your head down and cover my back." He resumed firing, each shot measured, each impact immediate. The onslaught from above dwindled, becoming sporadic pops. The acrid tang of gunpowder mingled with the arid scent of the canyon. Amelia watched, transfixed, as Boone systematically neutralized his attackers. It was a brutal ballet, efficient and terrifyingly compelling. He was safeguarding her. The realization struck her like a physical blow. For years, she'd been a commodity, a curiosity, someone to be exploited. No one had ever put their life on the line for her. Never had anyone looked at her with such fierce determination, such unshakable resolve. The final shot reverberated, followed by a protracted, pregnant silence. Boone remained motionless for a heartbeat, rifle trained on the escarpment, ensuring no one remained. Then, slowly, he lowered his weapon. He turned to Amelia, his expression grave. "It's over," he rasped, his voice rough-edged. For now, he holstered his rifle and approached. As he neared, Amelia noticed the subtle tremor in his hands, the sheen of sweat on his brow. He wasn't a superhero. He was simply resolute. He reached out, gently brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. The gesture was tentative, almost apologetic. "You all right?" Amelia nodded, speechless. The fear began to ebb, replaced by a curious blend of gratitude and wonder. She caught a glimpse of the man beneath the stoic facade, a man capable of both chilling violence and unexpected gentleness. "We need to move," Boone stated, his voice regaining its customary steadiness. "They'll be back." He assisted her onto her horse, his hand resting briefly on her arm. As they steered deeper into the canyon, Amelia glanced back at the ridge. The bodies were concealed, but the echo of the gunfire, the paralyzing fear, and Boone's unwavering protectiveness would forever be branded into her memory. This canyon, this ambush, had irrevocably altered something between them. The fragile tendrils of trust that had begun to unfurl were now hardened with a newfound respect, a shared awareness of the looming perils, and a burgeoning dependence on one another. Forest of secrets. The desert scrub gave way abruptly to a wall of green. Towering pines crowded close, their needles carpeting the ground in a thick, yielding layer. Sunlight struggled to pierce the canopy, casting the forest floor in perpetual twilight. The air hung thick and damp, smelling of pine and rich earth, a stark contrast to the dry, sun-baked landscape they'd left behind. Boone drew his rifle, his gaze sweeping the perimeter. "Stay close," he murmured, his voice barely audible above the rustling of leaves. "We're not the only ones who seek shelter here." Amelia shivered, not entirely from the chill. The forest felt alive, watchful. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden menace. This wasn't the open expanse she'd grown accustomed to. This was a place of secrets. "Can you track them in here?" she asked, her voice tight. Boone knelt, examining the ground. "Their horses will leave a trail for a while, but this ground will swallow it soon enough." He stood, his expression grim. This forest evens the odds. He spent the next hour teaching her the basics. How to identify edible plants, how to build a snare, how to find water. He showed her how to tell direction by the moss growing on the trees, and how to listen for the telltale signs of animals, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves. Amelia absorbed the information with a fierce concentration, her initial fear slowly giving way to a nascent sense of empowerment. Each skill Boone imparted felt like another shackle breaking, another piece of her stolen agency returned. As dusk began to settle, casting long, eerie shadows, they found a small clearing near stream. Boone started a fire, the flames crackling merrily, chasing away the gloom. They ate in silence, the only sounds the chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. After they finished, Amelia broke the silence. "Why did you do it, Boone? Why did you save me?" Boone looked into the flames, his face etched with weariness. "I couldn't stand to see you caged. But why me? You didn't know me." He sighed, the sound heavy with unspoken grief. "Maybe I saw a little of myself in you, Sparrow." Amelia frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "I wasn't always this." He gestured to his worn clothes and weathered face. "I was a doctor once. A good one, I think. I had a family, a wife, a daughter." His voice trailed off, thick with pain. He didn't elaborate, and Amelia didn't press him. She knew what it was like to carry a weight of sorrow, too heavy to share. Instead, she told him her own story, the words tumbling out in a rush, as if a dam had finally broken. She spoke of her parents, who had abandoned her at the orphanage, of the loneliness and despair that had haunted her childhood. She told him of the circus owner, a man with cruel eyes and a whip, and of the years she'd spent performing, a prisoner in a gilded cage. As she spoke, Boone listened intently, his gaze never wavering. When she finished, tears streamed down her face, and he reached out, gently wiping them away with his thumb. His touch was surprisingly tender, sending a shiver down her spine. "I'm so tired, Boone," she whispered. "Tired of being afraid." "I know," he said softly, "but you're not alone anymore." He then confessed about the tragic accident, a runaway wagon, a dark road, a moment of carelessness that cost him everything. He spoke of the guilt that gnawed at him, the feeling that he didn't deserve happiness. "You can't carry that forever," Amelia said, her voice firm. "It'll crush you." Boone looked at her, his eyes filled with a raw vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "Maybe," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Maybe you're right." The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on their faces. The forest, once menacing, now felt like a sanctuary, a place where they could begin to heal together. Blackwood's downfall and a new beginning. Silas had misjudged her. Again, a brittle satisfaction iced Amelia's veins as the two brutes he'd sicked on her tumbled into the ravine. Not a fatal drop, but the curtain of thorny vines she'd meticulously masked would keep them occupied. Boone's tutelage had served her well. He'd taught her to interpret the land, to weaponize its natural contours. He waited by the horses, worry creasing his brow. "You all right, Sparrow?" She nodded, a genuine smile finally breaking free. "More than all right. Turns out, I prefer hunting to being hunted." Their flight traced a path back toward the abandoned circus grounds, a risky necessity. Amelia clutched a plan, a desperate gamble predicated on unmasking Silas's true nature. Boone, despite his misgivings about confronting Silas on his own turf, had pledged his aid. The scheme unfolded under a starless sky. Boone instigated a distraction, kindling a small blaze near the circus perimeter, luring Silas and his henchmen from the big top. Meanwhile, Amelia infiltrated the tent, her pulse a frantic drum against her ribs. Beneath Silas's ostentatious throne, she located the strongbox. Inside lay the contracts, each signature a brand of his dominion over the performers. With fingers that trembled despite her resolve, she gathered them, righteous fury igniting within her. Silas's return was premature, his features twisted into a grotesque mask of rage. He found Amelia center stage, the contracts a defiant flag in her grasp. Drawn by the uproar, the other performers emerged from their wagons, their faces a canvas of apprehension and burgeoning hope. "You thieving little viper," Silas bellowed, stalking toward her. "Those are mine." Amelia stood firm. "They belong to these people," she countered, her voice ringing with newfound strength. "To those you've preyed on for far too long." She flung the contracts into the crowd. "Take them. They're yours. You're free." A wave of murmurs swept through the performers. Silas surged toward Amelia, but Boone intervened, a bulwark against his fury. A savage brawl erupted, the air thick with dust motes dancing in the lantern light and the sharp tang of sawdust and exertion. Though the larger man, Boone was a whirlwind of motion, evading Silas's clumsy attacks. A final, well-aimed blow sent Silas crashing to the ground. Emboldened by Boone's valor and Amelia's temerity, the performers surged forward, their suppressed resentment erupting. They inflicted no physical harm, but they dismantled his power, shattered his illusion of control. The cruelty he had masked behind showmanship was now exposed for all to witness. The authorities arrived swiftly, summoned by the escalating chaos. Silas, broken and humiliated, was led away, his reign of terror finally extinguished. The circus dissolved, its members scattering like seeds on the wind, each seeking their own fertile ground. Years slipped by, softening the sharp edges of the past, replacing them with the soothing balm of love and purpose. Boone and Amelia resided on a sprawling ranch nestled in a tranquil valley, not a circus, but a sanctuary. They rescued the broken, horses with mended legs, abandoned dogs, birds with healed wings. Each a testament to the enduring strength of spirit, a mirror reflecting their own hard-won journey. Amelia, no longer Sparrow, but simply Amelia, knelt in the rich soil, tending to a newborn foal. Boone watched her, his gaze brimming with tenderness. He had exchanged his firearms for the tools of nurture, his haunted memories for a future painted with promise. He approached, gently tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "She's beautiful, Amelia." Amelia smiled, her eyes sparkling. "Just like you, Dusty." The air hummed with the contented sounds of rescued creatures, the heady fragrance of wildflowers, and the soft music of their voices. The circus had become a distant echo, a faded tintype in the album of their lives. They had discovered liberation, not in flight, but in belonging, in crafting a haven for themselves and for others. Blackwood's descent had cleared the path for renewal, a life enriched by love, driven by purpose, and anchored by the unwavering conviction that even the deepest wounds could mend.